the 90s? A decade? A mood? A flight of fancy? A mistake? A struggle for our very souls? These questions and more are what I've been exploring throughout these episodes, attempting to extrapolate some kind of larger cultural meaning by examining the music that was popular during the years 1990 to 1999 Anno Domini. But why? Was there anything special about these years in particular? I don't know. If there even was anything unique about this decade, I'm certainly not the right person to try to identify it. Because if I'm being honest, the only reason the 90s mean anything to me is because I was young during them. I have no idea what, if anything, they'd mean if I weren't. And what do young people like more than people of any other age do, to the point where it's been an ongoing stereotype since pretty much the start of the 20th century? Music. And why is this? I may not have time to go into it, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's because music has the ability to feel momentous while actually being trivial in terms of its effect on the world. And that's how it retains its power to evoke the time period it was made in like no other medium can. And you can just chalk that up to mere nostalgia, but it's more than that to those of us who lived it. It's more like evidence that the past existed, and therefore so did you. Well, here's a take hot enough to singe off your fingerprints. Maybe the 90s were just another arbitrary set of years, no different from any other. Anyone who's been around for long enough knows that if you keep paying attention, you can watch history repeating itself in real time. Try it. Stick around for a while and you will eventually see the same recurring archetypes come and go. The uncharitable reading of this is that we keep returning to tried and true formulas and rehashing the past in an endless cycle of self-cannibalization. But I choose to see it as certain personae just seem to fill a need in the culture. As long as there are young people, there will always be looking for someone to echo their own voices back to them. Someone who can tap into a sense of collective id and speak to the common disaffection they all feel. Typically, this voice will sound young, loud, and snotty, but it's really just a matter of whatever happens to resonate at that particular moment in time. I guess this is all just a long way of saying every generation gets the youthful rebellion it deserves. Not that Shampoo ever were or deserved to be the voice of their generation, but despite their glaring deficiencies, there is something about them that I find oddly representative. Like, why not them? Certainly their conception was built on a winning enough idea. Bratty, punk rock, princess, and femme terrible. That's the kind of thing that never seems to go out of style, and it's not as if it didn't fit comfortably into the zeitgeist of the mid-90s. We kind of liked things a little raw back then. Everyone was doing some form of aggressive normality or lo-fi amateurism. It was the first great age of the relatable pop star. But maybe what they were doing was just a little too real. Like, even when the whole appeal of a musical act is that they're supposed to be kind of rough around the edges and all up in your face, we still expect their presentation to come across with a little more polish than this. We want some reason to believe there's a little more going on under the surface. Just the slightest semblance of professionalism would be enough. But Shampoo weren't about that life. Their sound may have been pure novelty, but it was delivered with zero irony. I think what really would have established Shampoo as a legitimate force in the mainstream would have been some indication that they themselves were in on the joke. But none of this was a joke to them. They were exactly what they appeared to be. And sadly, the complete lack of guile that made them so genuinely refreshing also precluded them from transcending their shockingly amateurish presentation. Shampoo were two teenagers from Plumstead, London, England, named Jackie Blake and Carrie Askew. Does it matter which one was which? I'm not totally sure. They sing in unison a lot of the time and don't really make any effort to distinguish themselves from each other. In fact, they sound like nothing so much as a couple of best friends hanging out in their bedrooms and singing along to songs on the radio and practicing their choreography together in the mirror. The whole Shampoo aesthetic has this uncomfortable vibe of capturing something that is normally intended to be private and a little embarrassing. Like, have you ever seen somebody sort of singing theatrically to themselves and you can just tell that they think nobody can hear them? And then they notice you? That's kind of what it feels like to listen to Shampoo. The two girls met at school and started writing a fanzine about the underground UK band Manic Street Preachers called Last Exit. I'm not totally sure how to explain what a fanzine was. Just imagine if, like, people printed out their Tumblr pages and handed you copies at local shows. I don't even know how to begin to explain Manic Street Preachers to you, but all you really need to know is that they were extremely important to British music fans in the 90s. Apparently, the fanzine actually got the attention of the band members themselves, who liked it so much that they invited the girls to be in the video for their song Little Baby Nothing off their 1992 debut album, Generation Terrorists. So just imagine you're some punk kid in the UK and you and your best friend start this little labor of love that results in an opportunity for you to meet your idols and even be immortalized in one of their videos. That's gotta feel like a dream come true, right? But then where do you go from there? Well, if you're the members of Shampoo, you have just experienced firsthand some of what it's like to be in a band and perform music, and you decide, hey, I can do that too. Doesn't seem so hard, right? Or maybe they always had ambitions to make their own music, and that connection just helped to make it happen. Either way, they released their first single, Blisters and Bruises, co-written with Felt frontman Lawrence on Ice Rink Records in 1993. According to a handful of sources that I've read, they named themselves Shampoo after a nickname, the Shampoo Girls, given to them by boys in their school. Because whenever boys would ask them out, they would give them that age-old excuse of having to wash their hair that night, which is admittedly pretty funny. In 1994, their full-length debut album, We Are Shampoo, was released on Food Records, which kicked off with opening track, first single, and still the band's best-known song, Trouble. This song got to number 11 on the UK chart and semi-blew up in North America in 1995 when it was featured on the soundtrack to the movie Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which I guess is not a huge surprise that they wanted to use that song for this movie. It certainly seems to fit right in on the updated video that they made for it.
We're in trouble, gotta get home quick, march on the double.
In fact, one could easily have been misled into thinking this song was created specifically for the movie, which was the sort of thing that happened back then. And speaking as a Power Rangers fan at the time, who was super disappointed by the movie, by the way, this seemed like the perfect fit for other reasons too. See, even as a kid, it was clear that the bulk of the action scenes in Power Rangers was just repurposed footage from old Japanese monster shows. Like, I had seen shows like Ultraman, Kikaida, and Kamen Rider, so I was familiar with the concept. Maybe it was this background knowledge, or maybe it was just that Shampoo sounded so strange compared to what was in the mainstream at the time, but for whatever reason I could have sworn that they were a Japanese band when I first heard them. As it turned out, the band was quite successful in Japan and often toured there. So I guess at some point I should attempt to describe what they sound like. To me, at least on this song, they come across as this frothy hybrid of punk rock, bubblegum pop, and a little bit of rap. Other tracks from the album sound pretty much exactly like early Beastie Boys. And their overall style tends to lean more toward pop a lot of the time, although it is a form of pop music that seems to lack any sense of technique or competence. It's as if they end up sounding like punk rockers not so much as a reaction against pop music, but more as a result of earnestly attempting to make quality pop music and failing. It feels kind of mean to say this, but a lot of it actually reminds me of Wesley Willis, where this whole approach, while unique, is clearly born out of a necessity and an inability to make decent sounding normal pop music.
Delicious, running wild in the city late at night.
Most of the songs are short, like under 3 minutes, which seems to reinforce their connection to punk. But throughout the whole album, there's this weird plastic, fakey, glossy sheen over everything, which sort of robs even the stronger material of the directness and immediacy that it should have. They come across as a bit overproduced, and it ends up making songs sound like slick radio Disney hits when they should sound more like the Stooges. Lyrically, they present a point of view that I find to be more interesting than it probably has any right to be. There's this naive sort of self-righteousness to everything, as they sound a bit overly harsh and judgmental towards boys who play too many video games or take random out-of-nowhere shots at Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey. But at the same time, it's really hard to take any of it all that seriously, and it's nearly impossible to detect any genuine angst to it, as they bring a playful sort of energy to every song. It may be rebellion for the sake of rebellion, but in the end it's all in good fun, and there's only so far out of my way I can go towards really trashing that kind of thing. This doesn't mean that it's always the most listenable stuff. Most of the songs have a good hook or two here or there, but the counterintuitive mix of completely amateurish and inept writing and performances combined with way too clean and overprocessed production work can be downright off-putting to listen to. It's as if the music can't commit either way, so you're getting headbutted in the face with these two opposite extremes at the same time. So then, what was the appeal of it supposed to be? It's got too much of one thing and not enough of another, to the point where it actively feels like that one thing is trying to compensate for the other. Who is this music for? And here is where we reach the one point where Shampoo's clarity of vision and sense of purpose really shine. Naturally, it involves me getting on my representation of women's points of view in 90s alt-rock high horse once again. If there has ever been any other era where female voices in the rock genre were stronger, louder, or more prominent, before or since, please let me know in the comments, because I sure can't think of any. Long before we reached our current cultural environment of girls running the world and a female-focused future, Shampoo set out to be leaders at the forefront of a radical pro-woman movement. Even the songs that aren't overtly about how awesome girls are remain rooted in that perspective, and are specifically concerned with the experiences that are unique to their age group and gender. It may not have been totally intentional, so much as it was just the product of their myopic worldview, but maybe their rebellious streak wasn't as empty as it seemed. Turned out they actually did stand for something. As if to make the point as bluntly as possible, their follow-up album encapsulated their mission statement with a simple catchphrase that would eventually take on a life of its own. Yes, this is before the Spice Girls co-opted the phrase. And with them, it always seemed like marketing or like it had nothing to do with them musically, but there can be no mistaking that Shampoo actually means this. They walked the walk. Or, you know, at least they made songs about it once in a while. This album was panned by critics and flopped pretty hard commercially, but it's not like it's that much worse than the first album. Yes, the shtick may have been wearing thin by this point, but isn't that sort of always what happens with punk? Shampoo were an especially one-dimensional band with, honestly, kind of a unique sound for the time. I actually find that I like them less the more that they attempt to branch out.
I know what boys like. We know what guys want. I know what boys like.
Like on this song, a cover of I Know What Boys Like by the Waitresses, which I have personally never enjoyed. This is not what Shampoo should be doing. The Shampoo that I know could not even begin to care less about what boys liked. How are you to make an album called Girl Power and then cover a song called I Know What Boys Like? Shameful.
Don't call me babe.
Shampoo were dropped from Food Records following the release of Girl Power and never were able to get signed to another record deal. They also didn't manage to put out any more new music during the 90s and finally ended up self-releasing their third album, Absolute Shampoo, in 2000 via something called the internet? Apparently it's been around for a while. That sort of move is something that major artists do all the time today, but back in 2000 nobody was listening to free new albums dropped online. That was looked down on, like, what, you couldn't afford a real album release? Yeah, technology has a way of equalizing things. The band broke up around this time, more or less giving up on the whole music thing due to a lack of interest from the labels. As of this day, they haven't bothered reuniting and have apparently just dropped off the radar completely. It is a little surprising to me that they didn't just go independent, but for what they were doing, it seems kind of fitting. This band would just not work if they continued doing it into their 30s, not without becoming something else entirely. Still, I don't see why they couldn't have been bigger. Maybe they just arrived a little too early in the 90s to really ride out the big pop-punk wave, or maybe their weird blend of styles is just seen as too comical to make much of an impact. But considering how much silly 90s stuff is still remembered, I don't see why we can't make any room in our nostalgic hearts for the girls from Plumstead. I am Jacob, and this was Rad 90s Music. I'll see you sometime in the future.